The first stone was cast not with a shout, but with a whisper. Across the vast, sterile expanse of the marble table at Aura, a restaurant so exclusive it felt less like a place to eat and more like a high-security art gallery, Mr. Alistair Finch leaned forward. His smile was a masterpiece of predatory charm, all brilliant white teeth and crinkled, insincere eyes. He was speaking about charity, about lifting communities, about the children. He always spoke about the children when the deal was worth more than 8 figures. And so, Madam Yu, he concluded, his voice dripping with the practiced honey of 1,000 successful pitches, your partnership with the Sterling Foundation won't just be a donation. It will be a legacy. His audience of 3, his skeletal, sharp-eyed COO, Evelyn Reed, a nervous, hired translator, and the subject of their intense focus, Madame Yu Jin, remained impassive. Madame Yu, a woman whose net worth was rumored to rival the GDP of a small island nation, looked profoundly unimpressed. She was a tiny woman, lost in the cavernous leather chair, dressed in a simple, dark silk dress that absorbed the light rather than reflecting it. Her face, a mask of serene wrinkles, betrayed nothing. Her black, obsidian eyes stared not at Finch, but at a point somewhere just past his shoulder, as if watching a ghost only she could see. For 2 hours, the dinner had proceeded like a slow, painful dance of misunderstanding. Finch and Reed spoke in effusive, jargon-laced English. The translator, a young man sweating in his oversized suit, would then chew their corporate soliloquies into clumsy, overly formal Korean. Madame Yu would listen, her hands resting motionless on the table, and respond with a single, quiet sentence in Korean. The translator would then fumble to reassemble her cryptic pearl of wisdom into something palatable for his employers. It was a farce, and everyone knew it. Finch and Reed saw the woman before them not as a person, but as a vault to be cracked. They saw her silence as senility, her traditional dress as a sign of being out of touch, her reliance on a translator as a weakness to be exploited. From the periphery, moving with a practiced invisibility, Anna Kim watched it all. Anna was their waitress. To the patrons of Aura, she was a pair of hands that refilled water glasses, a quiet voice that announced the name of a dish no one would remember, a ghost in a starched black uniform. At 24, she carried the weariness of someone twice her age. This job, with its grueling hours and microscopic paychecks, was the only thing keeping her younger brother in college, and the eviction notices from sticking to their apartment door. She had learned to make herself small, to anticipate needs before they were voiced, to become part of the seamless, silent machinery of elite service. She understood the unspoken language of this world, the dismissive flick of a wrist that meant a plate was finished, the subtle tightening around a man's eyes that signaled his displeasure with the wine, the way a woman would touch her hair as a prelude to a complaint. But tonight, she understood another language, one that flowed under the surface of the awkward, stilted English and the butchered translations. She understood Korean. It was the language of her childhood, the language her grandmother sang lullabies in, the language she spoke with her brother when they were too tired for English. And she heard what the translator either missed or deliberately omitted. When Finch had boasted about the Sterling Foundation's unprecedented 95% efficiency rating, Madame Yu had murmured, "A polished stone can still hide a crack." The translator had rendered this as, "She is very impressed by your efficiency." When Reed had presented a glossy brochure filled with smiling, impoverished children, Madame Yu had said flatly, "A paper smile does not warm a cold room." The translator had offered, "The photographs are very moving." Now, after Finch's grand finale about his legacy, Madame Yu finally shifted. She picked up her porcelain teacup, her movements so delicate and precise they seemed ceremonial. She took a sip of the lukewarm tea. Anna knew it was lukewarm because the manager insisted on pre-pouring it 10 minutes before serving, a breach of etiquette that always bothered her, and placed the cup back in its saucer with a soft click that echoed in the tense silence. She looked at Finch, her eyes finally meeting his. Then she spoke. Her voice was not frail, but clear and sharp, like the striking of a small, perfect bell. "Sa 기gun이 장부의 무대운 잉크가 가장 먼저 번지는 법입니다." Alistair Finch's smile didn't falter. He looked expectantly at the translator. The young man swallowed hard, his face pale. He cleared his throat. "Madame Yu says," she says, "that a legacy is built on strong foundations. She thanks you for the wonderful presentation." Finch beamed, a wave of relief washing over him. He shot a triumphant, conspiratorial glance at Evelyn Reed, who allowed a rare, thin smile to grace her lips. They thought they had her. They thought the deal was done. But Anna, standing by the service station, her hands gripping a silver tray, felt a cold dread snake up her spine. She had heard it perfectly. The translator hadn't just paraphrased, he had lied. What Madame Yu had actually said was, "The ink on a fraudulent ledger is always the first to run." It wasn't a proverb. It was an accusation. The statement hung in the air, a ghost of meaning that only two people in the room seemed to comprehend. Anna's heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't a business negotiation anymore. This was something else entirely. She looked at Madame Yu, this quiet, inscrutable woman, who was either a fool or the most dangerous person Finch and Reed had ever met. Alistair Finch, basking in his perceived victory, raised his wine glass. "To a new partnership," he declared, his voice booming with false sincerity. "To the sterling foundation." And to our esteemed guest, Madame Yu Evelyn Reed, raised her glass. The translator, eager to please, did the same. Madame Yu did not. She simply watched them, her expression as placid and unreadable as the surface of a deep, dark lake. Her eyes, however, drifted from Finch's smug face and settled, for a brief, arresting moment, on Anna. It was a look of such profound, piercing intelligence that it stole the breath from Anna's lungs. In that fleeting second, Anna understood that Madame Yu was not just aware of her presence. She had been aware of it all along. She had seen the way Anna moved, the way she listened, the way her shoulders tensed every time the translator spoke. She had seen the flicker of understanding in her eyes. The world seemed to slow down. The clinking of glasses, the murmur of distant conversations, the entire oppressive atmosphere of the restaurant faded away, leaving only the silent, electric connection between the old millionaire and the young waitress. It was a shared secret, a spark of truth in a room built on lies. Madame Yu knew that Anna had heard, and Anna knew that Madame Yu knew. The knowledge was terrifying. The Sterling Foundation was one of the city's largest employers of low-wage service staff for their galas and events. A word from Alistair Finch could get her blacklisted from every high-end restaurant and hotel in the city. She had a brother to support, rent to pay. She was a nobody, a ghost. Getting involved was a form of self-destruction. Her mind screamed at her to turn away, to retreat into the shadows of her role, to forget the words she had heard. But her body remained frozen, held captive by that gaze. Finch and Reed, oblivious, began to discuss the logistics of the wire transfer, their voices low and greedy. They were already spending the money. Madame Yu let them talk, her attention still fixed on Anna. The corner of her mouth tilted up, a movement so minuscule it was barely perceptible. But it was there. It was a look that said, "The game has begun." A small act of kindness, born of professional habit, broke the spell. Anna noticed that Madame Yu's teacup, the one she had sipped from, was now cold. The manager would have a fit if he saw it sitting there empty. Moving on autopilot, her body remembering its function even as her mind reeled, Anna glided over to the table. She ignored the powerful executives. She ignored the babbling translator. She addressed the only person at the table who seemed to see her. Bowing her head slightly, as her grandmother had taught her, she reached for the cup. "Forgive me, madam," Anna said, her voice a low murmur, almost inaudible. "Your tea has gone cold. Allow me to bring you a fresh, hot pot." She didn't say it in English. She spoke in quiet, respectful Korean. Alistair Finch and Evelyn Reed didn't even look up. To them, it was just the waitress clearing the table, making background noise. But the effect on Madame Yu was instantaneous. Her placid mask dissolved, replaced by a flicker of genuine surprise, followed by a deep, knowing calm. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't just permission. It was an acknowledgement, an alliance. As Anna turned away, the teacup in her hand feeling as heavy as a sacred artifact, she knew she had just stepped over a line. She had announced herself. She had left the safety of the shadows and stepped into the light. And in this gilded, treacherous world, the light was where the predators hunted. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the cup on her tray. The ink on a fraudulent ledger. The words echoed in her head, a prophecy of a storm she was now standing directly in the path of. Here is part 2 of our story. The kitchen of Aura was another world, a circle of hell Dante had forgotten to chronicle. It was a cacophony of clanging pans, roaring flames, and the guttural shouts of the head chef, a man whose temper was as legendary as his truffle risotto. It was a place of steam, sweat, and relentless pressure. Usually, Anna found a strange comfort in its chaos. It was a physical manifestation of her internal anxiety, a place where her own turmoil felt normal. But tonight, the kitchen's heat felt suffocating. As she carefully prepared a new pot of sajak tea, a delicate green tea that required water heated to precisely 175 degrees Fahrenheit, a detail she knew the head chef would ignore, but she would not. Her mind was a whirlwind. The ink on a fraudulent ledger is always the first to run. What did it mean? It was too specific to be a mere philosophical musing. It was a targeted strike. Sterling Foundation. Alistair Finch. She thought of their glossy brochures, their ubiquitous ads on city buses featuring smiling children and promises of a better future. They were a pillar of the city's philanthropic community, a behemoth of virtue. To suggest they were engaged in fraud was like suggesting the sun rose in the west. It was unthinkable. And yet, the cold certainty in Madame Yu's voice. Anna's hands worked with the muscle memory of 1,000 shifts. She warmed the porcelain pot, measured the delicate, needle-like leaves, and watched the water thermometer with obsessive focus. Her grandmother had taught her the art of tea, a ceremony of patience and respect. "You are not just serving a drink," she used to say, her hands guiding Anna's. "You are offering a moment of peace. It must be perfect." Perfection was a shield. As long as she performed her duties flawlessly, she was safe, invisible. But she had spoken. She had revealed herself. When she returned to the dining room, the pot of tea balanced carefully on her tray. The atmosphere at the table had curdled. Finch's bonhomie had evaporated, replaced by a strained impatience. The translator was attempting to explain some complex clause in the donation agreement, but his words were faltering under Madame Yu's silent, unblinking stare. As Anna approached, Madame Yu did something unexpected. She lifted her hand, a small, elegant gesture that silenced the entire table. Everyone stared at her. She then looked at Anna, and a path seemed to clear between them. With the grace of a queen, Anna stepped forward and placed the small, steaming pot on the table. She set down a fresh cup, her movements fluid and silent. As she poured the pale green liquid, the fragrant steam rising like a prayer, she kept her eyes downcast, focusing on the stream of tea, on the perfect execution of her task. Madame Yu watched her every move. When the cup was full, she did not immediately drink. Instead, she gestured toward a small, exquisitely carved object sitting beside her plate. It was a wooden crane, no bigger than her thumb, its wings half spread, as if about to take flight. The wood was dark, almost black, and polished to a soft sheen, every feather carved with impossible detail. It hadn't been there when the dinner started. She must have taken it from her purse. "My father carved cranes," she said in Korean, her voice soft, but carrying a profound weight. "He believed they were messengers. They carry prayers to the heavens, and sometimes they carry warnings back to earth." Anna finished pouring and straightened up, her heart beating a little faster. It wasn't a random comment. Nothing this woman said was random. It was a message wrapped in a parable, delivered for an audience of one. Finch, annoyed by the interruption he didn't understand, barked at the translator. "What? What is she saying now? Is she talking about birds?" Before the translator could respond, Madame Yu reached out and gently nudged the wooden crane a few inches across the table, closer to Anna's side. It was an invitation, or a test. At that moment, a diversion occurred. Evelyn Reed's phone, which she had placed on the table, buzzed sharply. She glanced at the screen, and for a split second, her icy composure cracked. A flash of pure panic crossed her features before she smoothed it over, but Anna, hyper-aware of every detail, saw it. Reed excused herself abruptly, her voice tight. "A shareholder emergency. I must take this." She practically fled from the table. Finch watched her go, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. He was losing control of the room. He turned his attention back to Madame Yu, his fake smile firmly back in place. "Madam, my apologies. Please, let's return to the final pages of the agreement." But Madame Yu was no longer looking at him. She was watching the small space between herself and Anna. She had a choice to make: retreat into the safety of her role, or acknowledge the message. She thought of her brother, of the tuition payment that was due next week. She thought of the manager, whose reptilian eyes were already watching her, suspicious of the time she was spending at this table. Then she thought of her grandmother's words: "To see a wrong and do nothing is to become a part of it." With a deep breath that felt like a leap into an abyss, Anna met Madame Yu's gaze. "In Korean," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "It is beautiful, madam. A warning is only a curse if it goes unheard." A slow, genuine smile spread across Madame Yu's face. It transformed her, softening the severe lines and revealing a warmth that had been hidden deep beneath the surface. She had found her messenger. As if on cue, Madame Yu suddenly dropped her silk napkin. It fluttered to the floor by Anna's feet. A classic, almost cliché move, but in the coded language they were now speaking, it felt momentous. "Oh, how clumsy of me," she said, her tone light. Anna bent down immediately to retrieve it. Her fingers brushed against the fine silk, and underneath it, she felt the unmistakable shape of a small, thick piece of folded paper. As her hand closed around the napkin, Madame Yu leaned forward slightly, as if to watch her, and spoke another quiet sentence in Korean. Her voice pitched so low it was lost in the restaurant's ambient hum. "Some birds are not meant for cages." Anna's fingers tightened around the hidden note. She stood up, her face a neutral mask, and placed the napkin back on the table beside Madame Yu's plate. Their eyes met one last time. The exchange was complete. "Thank you, my dear," Madame Yu said, this time in heavily accented but clear English. It was the first time she had spoken the language all night. The shift was seismic. Finch's head snapped up. The translator looked utterly bewildered. You speak English?" Finch stammered, his composure finally cracking. Madame Yu gave him a serene, almost pitying smile. "A little," she said. "Enough to know when a man is sincere." She then took a slow, deliberate sip of her fresh, hot tea. The implication was as sharp and clean as a shard of glass. Anna retreated from the table, her body moving with a calm she did not feel. The folded paper in her pocket felt like a burning coal. Some birds are not meant for cages. Was she the bird? Or was Madame Yu talking about the embezzled money? Her mind raced as she entered the chaotic sanctuary of the kitchen. She had to see what was on the paper. But where? The staff locker room was too risky, and the manager was already giving her venomous looks. Another waiter, a gangly teenager named Leo, bumped into her. "Whoa, Anna. You look like you've seen a ghost." "Something like that," she mumbled. An idea sparked. The dry storage pantry. It was at the far end of the kitchen, seldom used during the dinner rush. It was her only chance. Making sure the manager was distracted by a screaming chef, she slipped away, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The pantry was small, dark, and smelled of yeast and spices. Leaning against a 10-pound sack of flour, her hands trembling, Anna pulled the folded paper from her pocket. It wasn't paper. It was thick, expensive cardstock, folded into a tiny, precise square. She carefully unfolded it. Inside, there was no message, no explanation. There was only a sequence of numbers and letters, written in elegant, deliberate calligraphy, and below it, a single cryptic word, a 743G 8814 bluebird. What was it? A bank account? A locker combination? A password? Bluebird. The word felt significant, symbolic. A small, ordinary bird, but one known for its brilliant color, a flash of impossible blue. A creature of the sky, gouged. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from her brother. "Just finished my midterm paper. Owe it all to you, sis. Don't work too late." The message was a sudden, sharp pang of love and terror. She was doing this for him. If she lost this job, his future was in jeopardy. But if she did nothing, what kind of future was she building for him? One where people like Alistair Finch always won? Where integrity was a liability? Clutching the note, she made a decision. She wasn't just a messenger anymore. She was a participant. Whatever this code meant, she would find out. Returning to the kitchen, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Alistair Finch was standing near the service entrance, speaking in a low, furious voice to the restaurant manager. The manager was nodding obsequiously, his eyes darting around the room until they landed, with malevolent precision, on Anna. Finch had noticed her. The quiet exchange, the shared language, her sudden significance to Madame Yu, he had finally put the pieces together. He saw her not as a waitress, but as a threat. The hunt had begun. Here is part 3 of our story. The rest of the evening passed in a haze of controlled terror. Every time Anna entered the dining room, she could feel Alistair Finch's eyes on her, a palpable weight of suspicion. He had dropped all pretense of charm. His conversation with Madame Yu became clipped and tense, a hostile negotiation stripped bare. He knew, somehow, that the ground had shifted beneath his feet, and he suspected Anna was the cause. The manager, now acting as Finch's loyal watchdog, shadowed Anna's every move. He assigned her to the tables furthest from the VIP section, criticized her for pouring a glass of water too slowly, and reprimanded her for a non-existent smudge on a wine glass. It was a campaign of petty harassment designed to intimidate her, to remind her of her place. Each passive-aggressive comment, each sneering look, was a warning. We are watching you. You are powerless. But they were wrong. The note tucked safely in her bra was a secret source of strength. 743G8814 Bluebird. It was a key, and a key implied a lock. While Finch and the manager saw a frightened little waitress, Anna was already working the problem, her mind a chessboard of possibilities. Her break was her only chance. She had 45 minutes. She bypassed the tense, gossip-filled staff room and slipped out the back delivery entrance into the grimy alley behind the restaurant. The cool night air was a shock after the kitchen's oppressive heat. Under the buzzing yellow glow of a single security light, surrounded by dumpsters and the stench of refuse, she pulled out her phone. Her fingers flew across the screen, a desperate search for meaning. She started with the obvious, a web search for Sterling Foundation and Bluebird. The first 100 results were useless. Articles about the Foundation's ornithology grants, press releases about environmental initiatives. But then she dug deeper, using more advanced search operators, looking for internal documents, for anything that wasn't meant for public consumption. And then she found it. It was a cached link to a login portal, an old version of the Foundation's donor relations website that had since been updated. The URL itself was a string of random characters, but the page title was clear: Project Bluebird, Tier 1 Donor Portal. Her heart leaped. This was it. The page was simple: a username field, a password field, and the Sterling Foundation logo. She tried every combination she could think of. Bluebird as the username, the number sequence as the password, the reverse. Nothing worked. Access denied. Of course it wouldn't be that simple. She was about to give up when she noticed something. At the bottom of the login page, in tiny, grayed-out font, was a link: System Administrator and Vendor Access. She clicked it. It took her to a different portal, this one looking much older, more utilitarian. It was a third-party vendor management system, the kind of boring, back-end software that corporations use to manage contractors. The login prompt was different here. It asked for a vendor ID. Her hands trembling, she typed in the code from the note. 743G8814. She took a breath, and for the password, she typed Bluebird. She hit enter. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the page refreshed. She was in. She had expected a trove of documents, a folder of incriminating files. But the page was almost entirely blank. It was a simple vendor profile page. The vendor's name was listed as Avis LLC, a generic, untraceable name. There was an address, which a quick search revealed to be a P.O. box in the Cayman Islands. And there was a list of invoices, dozens of them, stretching back over 5 years. Each invoice was for consulting services. Each one was for a massive, irregular amount. $150,000 here, $275,000 there, and each one had been approved by the same 2 people, Alistair Finch and Evelyn Reed. It was a classic money laundering scheme, a ghost vendor, a shell corporation, and 2 executives signing off on payments for services that were never rendered. The money was being systematically siphoned out of the foundation. Project Bluebird wasn't a charitable initiative. It was the name of their private slush fund. The ink on a fraudulent ledger. The proof was right here. Anna's blood ran cold. This was bigger than she could have imagined. This wasn't just corporate malfeasance. It was a federal crime. She took screenshots, her fingers moving frantically, saving everything to a secure cloud folder she had created years ago for her college applications. As she saved the last screenshot, she saw something that made her gasp. A new invoice had been added to the list. Its date was today. The amount was the largest yet, $5 million, and its status was marked pending transfer on donor confirmation. They were waiting for Madame Yu's money. The moment her donation cleared, they were planning to gut it, to steal $5 million intended for charity and send it straight to their offshore account. This dinner wasn't just a pitch. It was the final step in a massive heist. A noise in the alley startled her. One of the line cooks had come out for a smoke. He nodded at her, oblivious to the fact that he was interrupting the dismantling of a criminal empire. Anna quickly locked her phone and shoved it in her pocket, her heart hammering. "Everything okay, Kim?" the cook asked, lighting a cigarette. You look like you're about to be sick." "Just tired," she said, her voice shaky. "Long night." She hurried back inside, her mind reeling. She had the proof, but what could she do? Go to the police? A broke waitress with a handful of screenshots against one of the most powerful, well-connected men in the city? They would bury her. Finch would claim she was a disgruntled employee who had hacked the system to fabricate evidence. No one would believe her. She needed something more, something undeniable, something physical. Back in the dining room, the dessert course was being served. The tension at the VIP table was thick enough to cut with a knife. Madame Yu was now speaking exclusively in Korean, her questions becoming more pointed, more specific. Through Anna's new filter of knowledge, the conversation was no longer cryptic. It was a surgical interrogation. "Ask Mr. Finch," Madame Yu said to the translator, "about the administrative overhead costs for his overseas projects. The numbers in this prospectus seem unusually high." Finch, caught off guard, sputtered a weak response about logistical challenges and local tariffs. It was clear he was unprepared for this level of scrutiny. He had expected to dazzle her with charm, not defend a balance sheet. It was then that Anna noticed the exchange. It was so fast, so subtle, that anyone else would have missed it. As the busboy leaned over to clear a plate, Alistair Finch discreetly passed something to Evelyn Reed under the table. It was a flash of silver. A USB drive. Evelyn palmed it, her movements sleek and practiced, and slipped it into her designer handbag, which sat on the floor beside her chair. Anna's instincts screamed. That drive. That had to be it. The real ledgers, the unedited bank statements, the smoking gun. The screenshots were damning, but the raw financial data on that drive would be irrefutable. But how could she possibly get it? Reed guarded that handbag like a dragon guarding its hoard. As if sensing her thoughts, Madame Yu shifted the conversation. "I am very tired," she announced in Korean. "It has been a long evening. I must retire to my hotel." She made a show of looking at her watch. "However, I find I would like to take a walk in the small garden adjoined to this restaurant before my car arrives. It is a private garden, yes?" The manager, who had been hovering nearby, rushed forward. "Of course, Madame Yu. It is for our most exclusive guests. Completely private." "Good," she said. Then she looked directly at Anna. "Young lady," she called out, her voice clear, "please escort me." "Your Korean is much better than this young man's." She waved a dismissive hand at the humiliated translator. "And bring me one last pot of your excellent tea." It was a direct order and a brilliant strategic move. It separated her from Finch and Reed, and it brought her ally Anna to her side. Finch and Reed exchanged a look of pure panic. They couldn't object without looking churlish. Reluctantly, they stood as Madame Yu rose from her chair. "We will await your return," Finch said, his voice tight with restrained fury. "Do not bother," Madame Yu replied coolly. "My decision will be communicated through my lawyers in the morning." With that, she turned and walked toward the glass doors leading to the garden, expecting Anna to follow. Anna, her mind racing, grabbed a fresh pot of tea and hurried after her, leaving a flabbergasted and furious Alistair Finch in her wake. The garden was a small, manicured space, an oasis of calm surrounded by the towering steel and glass of the city. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and night-blooming jasmine. Madame Yu walked to a stone bench and sat down, looking up at the sliver of moon visible between the skyscrapers. "He is a snake, that one," she said in Korean, her voice losing its formal edge. "And his friend is a viper." "Madam," Anna began, her voice trembling slightly, "I found something." Project Bluebird, the invoices, the offshore account. Madame Yu held up a hand, silencing her. "I know," she said calmly. "My own people have been investigating the Sterling Foundation for 6 months. I knew of the fraud long before I accepted this dinner invitation." Anna stared at her, stunned. "Then, why are you here? Why this performance?" "Because knowing a snake is in your house is not enough," Madame Yu explained, her eyes hard as diamonds. "You must make it show its fangs before you cut off its head. Proof from the outside is one thing. Proof from the inside, proof of their actions tonight, is another. It is the difference between a scandal and a conviction." She paused, then turned her full attention to Anna. "I knew they were thieves, but I did not know they were so clumsy, and I did not expect to find an ally in a place like this." She gestured back toward the restaurant. "That USB drive Finch gave to Reed. It contains their escape plan, cleaned up ledgers for the accountants, and the real ones, showing the full extent of their theft for their private records. They plan to flee the country after they secure my donation." "We have to get it," Anna said, a new and unfamiliar boldness rising in her. "Getting it is not the problem," Madame Yu said, a sly, cunning glint in her eyes. "She will never let it out of her sight. No, we must be more clever." She reached into her small silk purse and pulled out an object that looked identical to the USB drive Finch had passed. A perfect silver duplicate. "This," she said, "is a key. But it opens a different kind of door. When she plugs this into her computer, it will not show her financial data. It will install a program that will give my security team complete remote access to her entire network. It will mirror her hard drive, her emails, her phone records. Everything. Anna stared at the drive, her mind barely able to comprehend the audacity of the plan. "You want to switch them?" "I cannot," Madame Yu said. "They are watching me." "But you are just a waitress, a ghost. You can move through their world, unseen." The plan was brilliant. It was terrifying. It was almost certainly impossible. "How?" Anna breathed. "She's sitting right there. Her bag is on the floor." Madame Yu smiled, a true strategist, enjoying the intellectual puzzle of the battle. "We will create a diversion. Something so chaotic, so disruptive, that for a few precious seconds, everyone's attention will be elsewhere." She looked around the serene garden, then back at the glass walls of the restaurant. Her gaze was calculating. "People like Finch and Reed," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "They build their lives on a foundation of perfect order. The greatest fear they have is not being caught. It is of public, undignified chaos." She looked at Anna, her eyes shining with a fierce, rebellious light. "You brought me tea. Now, I want you to help me spill it. Here is the final part of the story." The plan Madame Yu outlined was not just audacious. It was theatrical. It required perfect timing, unwavering nerve, and a deep understanding of human psychology. It was a plan designed to turn Anna's greatest weakness, her invisibility, into her most powerful weapon. "You will return to the table alone," Madame Yu instructed, her voice a low, urgent murmur in the fragrant garden. "You will tell them I am feeling unwell and that my car is on its way. You will look frightened. You will play the part of the dutiful waitress, concerned for our guest." "And you?" Anna asked, her heart pounding. "I will wait here for precisely 3 minutes," Madame Yu said, glancing at a delicate, diamond-studded watch on her wrist. "Then I will create the diversion. When it happens, you will have no more than 10 seconds. Do you understand?" Anna nodded, her mouth dry. 10 seconds to commit a felony that could either save millions of dollars or land her in prison. "Good," Madame Yu said, pressing the duplicate USB drive into Anna's hand. It was cool and smooth and felt impossibly heavy. "Do not fail, Anna Kim. The ink is about to run." Walking back into the restaurant felt like stepping onto a battlefield. The air was electric with tension. Finch and Reed were standing by the table, their faces masks of fury and anxiety. They saw Anna approaching alone and immediately descended on her. "Where is she?" Finch demanded, his voice a low growl. playing her part. Anna flinched, her eyes wide with manufactured fear. "I'm so sorry, sir," she stammered. "Madam Yu," she said, "she is not feeling well. She felt faint. Her car is coming to the front entrance. She asked to be left alone for a moment." The lie was plausible enough to sow confusion. Finch and Reed exchanged a panicked look. Their golden goose was flying away. "Did she say anything about the contract?" Reed asked, her voice sharp. "No, ma'am. She seemed very tired," Anna said, letting her voice tremble. Her performance was convincing. They saw what they expected to see. A flustered, unimportant girl caught in the middle of a high-stakes deal gone wrong. Their attention was on the bigger problem, the millions of dollars slipping through their fingers. They dismissed her, turning away to confer in furious whispers. Anna moved back towards the service station, her body vibrating with adrenaline. She placed the USB drive on a small tray, hiding it beneath a clean, folded napkin. She watched the clock on the POS system. 1 minute passed. Then 2. Her palms were sweating. At the 3-minute mark exactly, the diversion began. It started not with a bang, but with a crash. From the garden, there was a sudden, tremendous shattering of glass. It was so loud, so violent, that the entire restaurant fell silent. Every head turned towards the garden doors. Through the now spider-webbed glass, they could see Madame Yu standing beside an overturned table, a large, decorative ceramic planter smashed at her feet. She was holding her chest, her face contorted in what looked like a mask of pain, and letting out a cry of distress. Chaos erupted. Patrons jumped to their feet. The manager, his face ashen, began shouting at the staff. "What's going on? Someone call security. Call a doctor." Finch and Reed were frozen for a split second, their minds unable to process the scene. Their serene, controlled environment had been spectacularly violated. Then, driven by the primal fear of losing their investment, they both bolted towards the garden doors, pushing past stunned waiters. This was Anna's moment. The world seemed to slow to a crawl. As every eye in the room followed Finch, Reed, and the screaming manager, Anna moved. She was a ghost, a blur of black and white against the backdrop of chaos. She glided from the service station to the empty VIP table. Reed's handbag was there, on the floor by her chair, momentarily forgotten. Anna knelt, her movements swift and sure. She didn't fumble. She didn't hesitate. Her hand dipped into the bag, her fingers finding the cool, metal shape of the USB drive almost instantly. She pulled it out. In a single, fluid motion, she swapped it with the one from her tray and slipped the new drive back into the purse. She had it. She stood up, the real USB drive now concealed in her palm, and began clearing plates from the table. Her body language the picture of a diligent employee doing her job amidst a crisis. The entire exchange had taken less than 5 seconds. From the corner of her eye, she saw 2 paramedics rush past, heading for the garden. Finch and Reed were trying to get to Madame Yu, but a newly arrived security guard was holding them back. Anna retreated to the sanctuary of the kitchen, her heart threatening to beat its way out of her chest. She clutched the silver drive in her hand. It felt like a bolt of lightning, a conduit of immense and terrible power. The aftermath was a blur. Madame Yu, refusing medical treatment, was escorted out by her own security team, who had seemingly appeared from nowhere. She looked pale and shaken, but as she was helped past the kitchen entrance, her eyes met Anna's for a fraction of a second. It was a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. Finch and Reed were left to deal with the wreckage. They were questioned by restaurant security and, eventually, by the police who had arrived on the scene. Their evening of elegant, corporate predation had devolved into a public, humiliating fiasco. Anna finished her shift, her body running on pure adrenaline. She clocked out, changed in the locker room, and walked out into the cool night air. The most important piece of evidence in a multi-million-dollar fraud case tucked safely in her pocket. The showdown happened 2 days later. Anna received a discreet email with an address and a time. It was an opulent law office in a downtown skyscraper. When she arrived, she was shown into a conference room with a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city. Madame Yu was there, dressed not in simple silk, but in a razor-sharp business suit. She looked 10 years younger and radiated an aura of absolute authority. With her were 2 men in dark suits who introduced themselves as agents from the FBI's white-collar crime division. Anna placed the USB drive on the polished mahogany table. One of the agents plugged it into a laptop. For a few agonizing moments, there was only the sound of clicking keys. Then, the agent whistled, a low, soft sound of astonishment. "It's all here," he said, looking at his partner. "The real ledgers. Bank transfers, shell corporations. They didn't even bother to encrypt it properly. The arrogance." He looked at Anna with a newfound respect. "You have no idea what you've done, miss." At that moment, the conference room door opened. Alistair Finch and Evelyn Reed were shown in by their lawyer. They looked haggard, their confidence replaced by a twitchy, paranoid energy. They clearly thought this was a final settlement negotiation, a chance to salvage their deal. When Finch saw Anna standing beside Madame Yu, his face contorted with confusion and rage. "What is she doing here?" he spat. "This is a private meeting." "Miss, Kim is here at my invitation," Madame Yu said, her English perfectly unaccented, as cold and clear as a winter morning. "She is the interim director of the Sterling Foundation's new Oversight Committee." Finch and Reed stared, their minds refusing to compute. Before they could respond, the FBI agents stepped forward. "Alistair Finch, Evelyn Reed," the lead agent said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit money laundering." The color drained from Finch's face. Reed swayed, looking as though she might faint. The bravado, the arrogance, the carefully constructed empire of lies. It all crumbled to dust in a single moment, as they were read their rights and led away in handcuffs. Their expressions were not of anger, but of utter, pathetic disbelief. They had been taken down by a little old lady and a waitress. After they were gone, a profound silence filled the room. Anna looked out at the city, at the endless sea of lights. It looked different now. No longer a place of insurmountable power, but a place of possibility. Madame Yu came to stand beside her. "The foundation will be completely restructured," she said. "The stolen money will be recovered. Your first task as director will be to ensure it goes to the people it was meant for. Your starting salary is $300,000 a year, effective immediately." Anna was speechless. She thought of her brother, of their tiny apartment, of a lifetime of being invisible. It was too much to process. "Why?" Anna finally managed to ask, her voice choked with emotion. "Why me?" Madame Yu looked at her, her dark eyes soft. "That night at the restaurant," she said, "in a room full of powerful people who saw only a walking wallet, you were the only person who saw to it. That an old woman had a hot cup of tea." She placed a gentle hand on Anna's arm. "I did not hire you for your knowledge of finance, Anna Kim. I chose you for your character. In my experience, it is the far rarer and more valuable asset." She gestured to the silver USB drive still sitting on the table. "Men like Finch believe that power comes from things like this, from money, from secrets. They are wrong." She smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached her eyes. "True power lies in seeing the world as it is, and then having the courage to make it what it should be." Anna looked from the drive to Madame Yu, and finally back out at the sprawling city. For the first time, it didn't feel like it belonged to the Finches of the world. It felt like it could belong to her, too. Faith, she realized, wasn't just restored. It was rebuilt, stronger than before, on a new and unbreakable foundation.